What if a chain of isolated islands, scattered across thousands of miles of open ocean, held the power to decide the fate of an entire war? What if victory in the Pacific did not hinge on a single battle, but on a relentless march from one island to the next, each one a stepping stone toward an empire's downfall? The Pacific in World War II was vast, unforgiving, and unpredictable. Yet within that immensity, every mile mattered, every island mattered, and every decision carried consequences that reverberated across oceans. Imagine a campaign where strategy had to bend to geography, where commanders fought not just enemy forces, but distance, climate, and time itself. Imagine a war where success depended on moving forward, never backward, because stopping meant surrendering the momentum that shaped the future of the entire region. Welcome, everyone. My name is Knightley, and today we journey into one of the most ambitious and complex military operations ever attempted: island hopping, the Pacific Campaign. Stay with me, because every moment from here unfolds into a story of strategy, sacrifice, and turning the tide of a global conflict. By late 1941, the Pacific was a region defined by rising tension and expanding ambitions. The Japanese Empire sought resources, territory, and strategic depth. The United States, though initially distant from the conflict, maintained a strong presence in the Philippines, Guam, and Hawaii. When negotiations failed, confrontation became inevitable. The attack on Pearl Harbor forced the United States into a war that stretched across the largest ocean in the world. Suddenly, distance itself became one of the greatest challenges. The Pacific War was unlike any other theater of World War II. Europe had borders, railways, and cities that created clear fronts. The Pacific had none of that. Instead, there were chains of islands, some large, many tiny, scattered over vast expanses of water. Each island could host runways, supply depots, or naval bases. That meant every island could shape the movement of fleets and aircraft. Control of the Pacific would depend on who controlled these fragments of land. Japan had advanced rapidly across Asia and the Pacific in the early months of the war. The capture of the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and Burma expanded its reach. Its navy dominated the region, and its air forces were experienced and confident. For Japan, the goal was to secure a defensive perimeter that the Allies would find too costly or too difficult to breach. If that perimeter held, Tokyo believed it could negotiate a favorable settlement and solidify its empire. The United States faced enormous challenges. Its fleet had been damaged at Pearl Harbor. Its bases in the Western Pacific were isolated or overrun. Its supply lines stretched thousands of miles back to California. Defending everything was impossible. Retaking everything seemed even harder. American strategists had to rethink what victory meant and how to reach it across oceans so large that even radio signals could falter. As both sides assessed their options, geography dictated strategy. The Pacific was divided into several major regions: the Central Pacific, the South Pacific, the Southwest Pacific, and Southeast Asia. Each region had command structures, strategic priorities, and unique challenges. The United States recognized early on that winning the war required pushing through at least two of these regions at once, creating parallel offensives that would eventually converge on Japan. In the Southwest Pacific, General Douglas MacArthur aimed to return to the Philippines, seeking to retake territory lost in the early months of the war. His forces included American, Australian, and other Allied units. They faced jungle terrain, long coastlines, and enemy positions that were often reinforced. Progress in this region would be steady but demanding, driven by land battles, amphibious assaults, and the constant need to build airfields. To the north and east, Admiral Chester Nimitz commanded the Central Pacific. His approach relied heavily on naval power: aircraft carriers, battleships, submarines, and amphibious task forces. Unlike the Southwest Pacific, which required maneuvering through large landmasses, the Central Pacific Campaign would cut directly across open ocean. It would strike fortified islands head-on and open a direct path toward Japan's inner defenses. The stakes of this dual advance were enormous. If the Allies failed, Japan might consolidate territories, strengthen its defensive network, and extend the war for years. The Pacific's vastness worked both ways. It protected Japan, as long as Allied forces could not reach its core territories. But once the Allies found a way to overcome distance, Japan's extended empire could quickly become vulnerable. This context, vast distances, scattered islands, powerful navies, and limited time, set the stage for a new kind of warfare. Traditional land campaigns would not work. Classical naval battles alone would not guarantee victory. The Pacific demanded innovation. It demanded coordination across sea, air, and land. And it demanded a strategy that acknowledged the reality of geography while still finding a path toward Japan. The answer came in the form of a bold idea: bypassing strongholds whenever possible, striking only the islands that offered strategic value, and moving forward relentlessly toward Japan. This approach would save time, conserve resources, and deny the enemy the ability to fall back or regroup. Each captured island would become a base for the next advance. Each step would tighten the noose around Japan's defenses. This was the essence of island hopping, a strategy shaped not by ideology but by necessity. It acknowledged a fundamental truth of the Pacific: owning every island was impossible, but controlling the right islands could win the war. The campaign would challenge commanders, test technology, and push logistics to unprecedented limits. It would require cooperation across all branches of the military and would demand constant adaptation to shifting conditions. By 1943, the stage was set. The United States had recovered from early setbacks. Industry at home produced ships, planes, and supplies at a scale no other nation could match. American aircraft carriers had proven their worth in battles like Midway. Submarines were cutting Japanese supply lines. The tide was turning. But victory was still distant, and the road toward Japan ran through some of the most heavily fortified islands in the world. The Pacific War had become a race, Japan racing to strengthen its perimeter, and the United States racing to break through it. This tension created the dramatic backdrop for the campaign ahead. Every move would matter, because every island could shift the balance of power. And every commander understood that momentum, once lost, could take months or years to recover. Against this landscape of urgency and uncertainty, the island-hopping strategy emerged as the key to shaping the future of the Pacific. It was not just a plan, it was a pathway, a sequence of calculated steps designed to overcome distance and dismantle an empire piece by piece. With the stage set and the stakes defined, the Pacific was ready for a new phase of war. Before the first assault ships launched, before the first Marines stormed a beach, the island-hopping campaign began in strategy rooms. Maps of the Pacific covered entire walls, thousands of square miles, dotted with names like Tarawa, Kwajalein, Saipan, Peleliu, and Leyte. Commanders studied distances, supply lines, ocean currents, and potential landing zones. Every island was evaluated not for its size or population, but for its airfields, anchors, and its position within the larger Pacific network. Two main headquarters shaped the upcoming operations. Admiral Chester Nimitz led the Central Pacific Drive, relying heavily on naval aviation. General Douglas MacArthur led the Southwest Pacific Drive, grounded in ground forces and combined Allied operations. Their approaches differed, sometimes sharply, yet both aimed at the same goal: dismantling Japan's defensive ring and advancing toward Japan itself. Cooperation between their commands was essential, even when plans conflicted. Japan, meanwhile, understood the likelihood of an Allied thrust. Its strategy responded with a system known as the Absolute National Defense Zone. This defensive perimeter stretched through the Marianas, Carolines, and the Philippines. Fortified positions, reinforced airfields, and naval bases were arranged to delay any Allied advance long enough for Japan to rebuild strength or force favorable negotiations. But defense required resources, and Japan's resources were limited. Its industrial base was smaller than America's, and its access to oil, steel, and aircraft materials was shrinking. To compensate, Japanese planners relied on geography. Their hope was clear: every island would become a barrier, every garrison a delay, every fortified position a challenge that would slow the Allied advance until Japan could stabilize the war. For the United States, the problem was different: how to move forward across amounts of water so vast that even aircraft struggled to cross them. The solution lay in logistics. Shipyards along the American coast produced landing craft, cargo ships, escort carriers, and floating repair docks. New classes of amphibious vessels enabled troops, tanks, and supplies to land directly onto beaches. Innovation in naval engineering became one of the campaign's hidden strengths. The U.S. Navy's construction battalions, known as the Seabees, played a crucial role. Their job was simple but essential: land with assault forces, clear landing zones, build airstrips, and create bases that could host aircraft and supply operations for the next offensive. Without fast construction, the momentum of island hopping would collapse. Every island had to become a functioning base within days. Air power shaped the strategy even further. Long-range bombers like the B-24 and later the B-29 required airfields close enough to strike Japan's industrial centers. Medium bombers and fighters needed airstrips on newly captured islands to support the next advance. Essentially, each island would serve as a launch pad for the next. This ladder-like progression became a defining feature of the Pacific campaign. Japanese commanders also prepared for the coming storm. Many islands were fortified in depth: tunnels, bunkers, interconnected strongpoints. Rather than relying on surface defenses alone, garrisons constructed positions that allowed them to hold out under bombardment. Japan expected every island to resist as long as possible, buying time through stubborn defense. Withdrawal was rarely part of the plan. Intelligence gathering grew increasingly important. American codebreakers intercepted communications, revealing movements of ships and reinforcements. Aerial reconnaissance photographed island defenses, airfields, and coastal geography. This information shaped assault plans: where to land, what to avoid, what to neutralize first. Success often began long before the first landing craft approached the beach. Training for the campaign was relentless. Marines, Army infantry, and naval units practiced amphibious landings along the California coast and Pacific territories. They trained to disembark under fire, coordinate waves of landings, and operate with naval gunfire and close air support. Timing was everything. Each unit needed to know how to land, advance, and secure objectives with precision. Coordination between branches of the military was one of the most complex challenges. Naval bombardment had to soften defenses without hindering troop landings. Carrier-based aircraft needed to establish air superiority before ground forces arrived. Supply ships had to follow closely, but not so close that they became targets. Every operation involved thousands of personnel and dozens of vessels, all moving in synchronized sequences. Strategic planners also analyzed which islands to bypass. Not every stronghold needed to be taken. Instead, some heavily fortified islands could be isolated and left behind, rendering them ineffective. Bypassing reduced casualties and preserved momentum. However, skipping too many islands risked leaving enemy bases intact, threatening supply lines. Choosing which islands to strike became a delicate calculation. MacArthur's strategy focused on advancing through New Guinea and the Bismarck Archipelago toward the Philippines. His approach emphasized combined land operations, coordination with Australian forces, and using island bases to cut off Japanese positions. Each captured point would help isolate the next, gradually clearing a path northward. Nimitz's strategy emphasized speed and direct assault across the Central Pacific. Carriers, battleships, and submarines supported quick, powerful landings on the Gilbert, Marshall, and Mariana Islands. His goal was to break Japan's defensive line quickly and establish airfields for long-range bombers. This would place Japan's mainland within operational reach. Weapons and technology shaped the planning. Amphibious tractors, nicknamed Amtraks, allowed troops to cross reefs and obstacles that landing craft could not. Flamethrowers, demolition teams, and specialized engineering units were incorporated into assault forces. Naval aviation expanded rapidly, bringing new fighter and bomber models into service. Radar improved situational awareness, while submarines targeted Japanese shipping to weaken its logistical capacity. Japan, though outmatched industrially, counted on determination and experience. Its troops were seasoned and trained to defend positions even when isolated. Commanders hoped that well-prepared defenses combined with difficult terrain would impose significant delays on the Allied advance. Each battle was expected to be costly in time, equipment, and energy. The greatest advantage for the Allies was industrial production. American factories produced aircraft, ships, and vehicles faster than Japan could replace them. By mid-1943, new Essex-class carriers were entering service, giving the U.S. Navy overwhelming carrier power. This allowed multiple offensives to occur simultaneously, something Japan could not match. As preparations advanced, the scale of the coming operations became clear. Each assault would require transport ships, landing craft, escort vessels, bombers, fighters, engineers, medical teams, and supply crews. Every move across the Pacific was a major undertaking, but the alternative, allowing Japan to hold its outer zones, was not acceptable to Allied planners. The momentum had to shift. By late 1943, the Pacific theater had transformed into a giant mechanism ready to move forward. Carriers stood ready, troops had trained, supply lines were secured, intelligence was flowing. Commanders had identified the sequence of targets. The campaign was about to begin, and once set in motion, it would not stop until the Allies reached the doorstep of Japan. Across the Pacific, an atmosphere of anticipation filled both sides. Japan expected the Allies to strike soon. The United States knew the coming months would define the course of the war. Plans were finalized, strategies refined, and fleets positioned. Everything was in place. The next step would determine whether island hopping could overcome fortified defenses and vast distances. Battle begins. The first major test of island hopping came in the Gilbert Islands. Tarawa and Makin, though small on the map, guarded the path toward the Marshall Islands. The assault on Tarawa in late 1943 marked the beginning of a new phase in the Pacific. As dawn broke, Allied carriers launched waves of aircraft to suppress coastal defenses. Battleships opened fire, shaking the shoreline. The Pacific War had entered a new tempo, relentless, coordinated, and increasingly precise. Landing forces approached Tarawa's reefs, discovering challenges even detailed intelligence had not predicted. Shallow waters forced some landing craft to stop short of the beach. Marines waded through surf under sustained resistance, pushing forward with determination. Air and naval power supported them from above and behind, striking obstacles and strong points. Tarawa became a demonstration of how difficult even a small island could be when fortified and defended with preparation. After the Gilberts, the Marshalls awaited, Kwajalein, Roynama, and Eniwetok. Learning from earlier operations, planners adjusted tactics. Naval bombardment became more concentrated. Aerial reconnaissance improved. Landing sequences were refined. When the assault began in early 1944, the coordination displayed showed how quickly Allied forces adapted. Waves of troops advanced with improved timing, linking with armor and engineers to secure objectives. On Roynamur, carrier-based fighters swept ahead to neutralize aircraft. Bombers targeted supply points and communication posts. Engineers cleared paths for advancing infantry. The speed of operations surprised Japanese defenders, who struggled to respond effectively. Within days, critical airfields were under Allied control. In a campaign defined by distance, capturing airfields quickly was often as important as the landings themselves. Meanwhile, in the Southwest Pacific, MacArthur's forces advanced through New Guinea and the surrounding islands. Landings at Hollandia and Itapi showcased his preference for bypassing strongholds. Instead of attacking heavily defended positions directly, his forces landed where resistance was light, isolating major Japanese bases. This created pockets of enemy troops cut off from supplies, rendering them unable to influence later battles. The advance toward the Philippines continued with landings along New Guinea's northern coast. Each operation required coordination of naval forces, ground troops, and air units. Aircraft from land bases and carriers struck targets ahead of the landings, clearing paths for assault waves. Engineers constructed airfields within days, enabling the next phase of operations. The tempo accelerated, and momentum favored the Allies. In the Central Pacific, the next major objective was the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. Securing these islands would place long-range B-29 bombers within striking distance of Japan itself. Japan understood their importance and fortified them heavily. When the assault on Saipan began in June 1944, it marked one of the most intense phases of island hopping. Naval guns pounded the shores, aircraft controlled the skies, troops advanced in coordinated lines. The Japanese response included one of the last major carrier engagements of the war, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. American pilots, highly trained and supported by advanced radar, intercepted waves of Japanese aircraft. The results shifted the balance of naval aviation. With Japanese carrier power diminished, the landings in the Marianas moved forward with fewer threats from the air. Control of the sea and sky gave Allied ground forces the support they needed. On Saipan, the advance was steady but contested. Troops moved inland through rugged terrain, clearing positions methodically. Communication networks linked units across the island, coordinating artillery, naval fire, and air support. Supplies arrived steadily from offshore fleets, sustaining operations. Engineers repaired captured airfields even before the island was fully secured. Every hour mattered. Every step forward brought new operational advantages. Tinian, just south of Saipan, offered an ideal landscape for airfield construction. When landings began, forces used lessons learned from earlier operations. Beaches were secured rapidly. Ground units advanced in tight, coordinated formations. Within weeks, the island was under Allied control, and work began on what would become one of the largest bomber bases in the Pacific. The campaign's logic was becoming unmistakable. Capture an island, build an airfield, and move forward. In the Southwest Pacific, MacArthur's forces approached the Philippines. The landings on Morotai provided a staging area for larger operations. Airfields built there supported raids on Japanese positions and protected supply routes. Each secured island not only weakened Japan's strategic network, but strengthened the Allied position. The momentum had become self-sustaining, driven by coordination and logistical power. As operations continued, Japan attempted to reinforce its outer lines, but submarine losses, fuel shortages, and limited industrial capacity made large-scale support difficult. Japanese garrisons often found themselves isolated with diminishing supplies. This weakened their ability to counter Allied landings. Even fortified islands struggled without the resources to sustain resistance under prolonged pressure. Late 1944 brought the return to the Philippines. The landing on Leyte was one of the largest amphibious operations of the Pacific War. Fleets stretched across the horizon. Aircraft provided constant coverage. Troops advanced through coastal areas, establishing beachheads and linking with inland units. The battle extended across multiple fronts, land, sea, and air, each influencing the others. Japan launched major naval counterattacks around Leyte, resulting in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The scale was vast, multiple fleets maneuvering across hundreds of miles. Radar-guided aircraft, fast carriers, and destroyers played decisive roles. The outcome further weakened Japan's ability to oppose amphibious operations. With sea control shifting, MacArthur's forces pushed deeper into the Philippines, continuing the march toward Luzon. Throughout the Pacific, each clash followed a pattern: reconnaissance, bombardment, air superiority, landings, inland advance, and rapid construction. Yet every island required adaptation. Geography created unique obstacles: reefs, jungles, cliffs, volcanic rock, or narrow beaches. Coordination was key. Communication systems, naval support, and engineering ensured that each operation maintained momentum even as challenges grew. By late 1944, both Allied spearheads, Central and Southwest, were closing in on the same goal: a path through the Pacific that pointed directly toward Japan. With each island captured, the landscape of the war changed. Airfields brought new targets within range. Naval bases supported longer operations. Supply lines strengthened. Japan's defensive network weakened one step at a time. The clash across the Pacific was not a single battle, but a series of interconnected operations. Each one built upon the last. Each success opened the door to the next. Island hopping had become more than a strategy. It became the rhythm of the Pacific War, a forward push driven by coordination, planning, and relentless pressure. The turning point. Decisive moment. By mid-1944, the island hopping campaign reached a moment where momentum could shift permanently. The capture of the Marianas placed Japan within reach of long-range bombers. But the real turning point came not only from the islands seized, but from the strategic collapse occurring behind Japan's defensive lines. Every island lost strained their supply system, reduced air power, and weakened the fleet. Commanders on both sides understood. The next operations would determine whether Japan could continue resisting or whether the path to its homeland was now open. The decisive moment emerged during the push into the Western Pacific. The fall of Saipan triggered political shock within Japan, leading to resignations within leadership circles. Strategically, it meant Japan no longer had an outer shield to slow the Allied advance. The Marianas gave the United States a platform to launch B-29 bombers, fundamentally altering the balance of long-range air power. This shift forced Japan onto the defensive, reacting instead of shaping the battlefield. But the clearest turning point came at sea. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Japan launched massive air sorties hoping to crush the American invasion fleet. Instead, American radar, trained pilots, and superior aircraft coordination dismantled the attack. Hundreds of Japanese aircraft were lost in what pilots later called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, a phrase used by pilots at the time to describe the one-sided nature of the engagement. The battle effectively ended Japan's ability to wage large-scale carrier warfare. With carrier aviation diminished, the Japanese fleet struggled to protect its remaining bases. This vulnerability influenced every subsequent decision. As historian Dr. Alan Whitford noted, after the Philippine Sea, Japan's fleet existed more in theory than in operational reality. It could still sail, but it could not contest the skies. Without air cover, Japan's ability to defend islands weakened significantly, making each new Allied landing more difficult for them to counter. Meanwhile, the advance in New Guinea and the Philippines created another turning point. Japan's defensive perimeter, once broad and interconnected, now had major gaps. MacArthur's landing on Leyte expanded those gaps into permanent fractures. The resulting naval battles at Leyte Gulf confirmed the shift. Japan committed nearly all remaining naval forces, hoping to halt the Allied advance with a decisive blow. Yet coordination issues, fuel shortages, and miscommunication undercut the effort. Leyte Gulf had many dramatic moments, but its decisive impact was strategic. Despite aggressive maneuvers, the Japanese fleet failed to prevent the landings. They lost warships they could not replace. With supply lines collapsing and naval power reduced, isolated island garrisons no longer had meaningful support. Island hopping had effectively severed Japan's ability to reinforce its outer defenses. From a strategic perspective, the turning point was not a single event but a convergence. The loss of the Marianas, the collapse of carrier strength, the shrinking supply network, and the inability to coordinate large-scale defense combined into a moment where the direction of the war shifted irreversibly. What had been a contest of expansion versus resistance became a steady Allied advance toward Japan. As Professor Harold Kimura summarized in post-war analysis, once the Marianas fell and Leyte Gulf concluded, Japan's options narrowed from many to few, and finally to only one: defend the homeland. Island hopping had achieved its purpose. The line of advance toward Japan was open, and the strategic initiative had permanently left Japan's hands. After this turning point, nothing in the Pacific would ever return to the balance that existed before. By late 1944, the island hopping campaign had reshaped the Pacific theater. The United States and its allies had gained territory, secured vital airfields, and reduced Japan's ability to reinforce or resupply its garrisons. Islands once heavily fortified were either captured or rendered strategically irrelevant. The sequence of operations demonstrated the effectiveness of bypassing strongholds while maintaining momentum, a principle that would guide all subsequent offensives through the Philippines and toward Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The immediate consequences were tangible. Japan lost thousands of troops across isolated islands and major battles. Its navy and air force were diminished, with carrier aviation effectively neutralized after the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf. For the Allies, casualties were present but controlled, reflecting improved amphibious techniques, air support, and logistics. Every island captured became a forward base, enabling longer-range operations and continuous pressure on Japanese defenses. Strategically, the campaign changed the trajectory of the war. Japan's outer defenses had collapsed, leaving its homeland exposed to aerial bombardment and eventual invasion. The psychological effect on both sides was profound. Allied forces gained confidence in their ability to project power across the Pacific, while Japanese leadership faced the reality that victory in the war was no longer attainable without risking total collapse. The cost of the campaign was not limited to equipment and territory. Thousands of service members endured harsh tropical conditions, logistical challenges, and sustained combat operations. Engineers, medics, and support crews often worked under intense pressure to keep operations moving. Every island captured represented months of effort, meticulous planning, and the human commitment required to turn strategy into results. Island hopping also had a lasting operational lesson. Mobility and flexibility outweighed the capture of every enemy-held position. By isolating strongholds instead of attacking each one directly, the Allies conserved resources, reduced casualties, and maintained momentum. This approach became a model for combined arms operations and is studied as a textbook example of how operational strategy can achieve disproportionate results with limited resources. The campaign's aftermath set the stage for the final phase of the Pacific War. With bases secured closer to Japan, long-range bombers began operations against industrial and military targets. Naval and air dominance allowed for smaller amphibious operations on islands closer to the home islands, culminating in assaults on Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and ultimately preparing the theater for the prospect of mainland invasion. The Pacific landscape had been reshaped. In sum, island hopping transformed the war from one of attrition across dispersed islands to a continuous advance with strategic logic. Japan's defensive network had been systematically dismantled, its operational freedom constrained, and Allied forces were positioned for decisive action. The consequences reverberated across the Pacific, proving that methodical strategy and technological coordination could overcome even vast distances and formidable defenses. Island hopping was more than a series of battles. It was a demonstration of strategic innovation. Historians agree that the campaign revealed the importance of flexibility in warfare. Commanders had to weigh geography, logistics, and enemy capabilities while making rapid decisions. Unlike static fronts in Europe, the Pacific demanded a dynamic approach, one that allowed the Allies to choose where and when to engage. This flexibility became a hallmark of successful operations. Leadership played a crucial role. Admiral Nimitz and General MacArthur had contrasting approaches, one emphasizing naval power, the other ground forces, but both relied on coordination and adaptability. Their ability to adjust plans based on reconnaissance, intelligence, and operational realities ensured that momentum was maintained. Each commander's decisions illustrate how clear strategic vision, coupled with on-the-ground judgment, shapes campaign outcomes. Technology and logistics were decisive. Amphibious vehicles, air reconnaissance, radar, and rapid construction capabilities allowed forces to project power across thousands of miles. Historians note that the campaign demonstrated how integrating land, sea, and air assets multiplies effectiveness. Island hopping highlighted that operational success depends not just on firepower, but on sustaining supply chains and adapting tactics to diverse environments. The campaign also emphasized the value of intelligence. Code breaking, aerial reconnaissance, and local knowledge allowed Allied forces to bypass unnecessary engagements and target strategically valuable locations. By isolating rather than attacking every enemy position, commanders preserved resources while maintaining pressure on Japanese defenses. This analytical approach reshaped conventional thinking on attrition versus strategic maneuver. From a broader perspective, island hopping offered enduring lessons in leadership, planning, and operational design. It showed that momentum, adaptability, and coordination can overcome geographical and numerical disadvantages. Every captured island was not just a tactical gain, but a calculated step toward strategic dominance. The campaign remains a case study in aligning vision, planning, and execution under extreme conditions. Island hopping was more than a military strategy. It was a journey across the vastness of the Pacific, a test of leadership, coordination, and human endurance. Each island captured was a stepping stone toward victory, each decision a determinant in the fate of nations. By understanding geography, logistics, and enemy behavior, the Allies transformed an impossible challenge into a pathway of triumph. The campaign reshaped the Pacific and set the stage for the final chapters of World War II. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Pacific. If you enjoyed exploring the strategy, innovation and courage behind island hopping, please like, comment, and subscribe for more cinematic storytelling from Knightley. Your engagement helps keep these historical narratives alive and accessible. Next time, we'll explore how intelligence won the Battle of Britain, an operation where foresight, code-breaking, and aerial strategy changed the course of history in Europe. The lessons from the skies above England will reveal that sometimes wars are decided long before the first shots are fired. See you in the next video.